People I mentioned earlier who helped us put this together. There's a special reception for those members at the Red Fox room afterward. We'll know you by your little stickers. And we thank you again for your support for making this possible. And I'm not going to make a long introduction to this next individual. We all know him as a true modern-day hero, going against the tide, not afraid, fearless, and we are so grateful that he's agreed to join us. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Lifelong commitment to civil rights, to the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution. There are many, many areas of differences in our political opinions over the past 40 years that both of us have been in politics, but both of us share the reverence for the Bill of Rights that I think ultimately is the retreat fortress where all of us are holding up today. Excuse my voice, which usually my voice gets better as I talk. So, I want to talk about the thing that we have in common, which is the erosion of the Constitution. I gave a speech in Berlin, I think last August, at the beginning of the pandemic, where I talked about Hermann Goering's observation at Nuremberg, where he was on trial and he was eventually executed. He said at that time, he didn't say in Nuremberg transcripts, he said it in a private conversation with a psychologist called Gustavo Gilbert, who was given access to the prisoners at Nuremberg. And that discrepancy, by the way, has been exploited by the modern propaganda of these fact-checking organizations, which of course are funded by Bill Gates, by Facebook, by the medical cartel, by the State Department, saying that he never said these words at Nuremberg, and it's true, he didn't say them in the transcript of Nuremberg, but they were recorded by Gustavo Gilbert. And what he said is, Gilbert said to him, how did you do this to the German people? And he started explaining all their propaganda techniques, and Gilbert interrupted him and said, but that couldn't happen in a democracy because there's free choice, there's critical thinking. And he said, you can do this, Goering said, you can do this in any system. It doesn't matter whether it's a democracy or a monarchy or a communist system or a fascist system. All you need to do is invoke fear. You tell the people that are under attack that you're the only one who can save them, and that anybody who disagrees with you is a threat to the Commonwealth. And they will do anything that you tell them to do. And today, Hitler was democratically elected by the most well-educated people on the planet, the highest level of education, and some of the most tolerant people in Europe at that time. The reason there were so many Jews in Germany is because they fled. Germany was very bad to the Jews long before Hitler, and much less bad than the Eastern European countries, or Spain, or the other countries from which they fled to come to Germany. And so you had people that historically were tolerant, open-minded, questioning, and critical, and probably the one, a republic was the strongest democracy in Europe. And Hitler was elected, he did not take over. He was elected by people who he had 3% of the vote in the previous election. And then he won the majority because he was able to manipulate the use of fear. And we've seen one of the alarming parts of this pandemic for those of us who are a little conversant with the kind of medical paradigms that are being invoked right now, to understand with such clarity the manipulations that are taking place, the chicanery, the hiding of real data, the obscuring of all of these, of true facts and figures that we could use to make rational policy decisions. How the case fatality rates relate to the seasonal flu for each age group. Who is dying at what age? Who is not? Who is, what are the real death counts from COVID? CDC has admitted that 96% of the people, only 4% of the people who are characterized, who it classifies as having died from COVID, died from only COVID. At the average number of potentially fatal comorbidities in the remaining 96% is 3.8. The people who died, 96% of them had almost 4 other reasons that might have killed them. And the manipulation of the death certificates, the manipulation of the PCR tests, all of these manipulations that are all designed, the Gates-funded projection from the London and from IMH in Washington, which they used to manipulate the lockdowns, which we now see were 40 times the death rate that actually was imposed by COVID. So all of these mechanisms appear to have been deliberately manipulated to put our population in a state of fear. And what happens when you have a population in fear? You have the complete obliteration of critical thinking. And people stop asking questions, and it is a biological impulse. We retreat to the hardwired impulses that were hardwired into us during the 20,000 generations that the human race was wandering the African savannah in small tribal groups, at war, in battle, besieged all the time. And the only way to survival was to follow a strong male leader, to embrace a common orthodoxy that would provide unit cohesion, and then to practice blind obedience to the leader. And that's where we all go in times of fear, unless we have something else that says to us, I'm going to question this. I'm going to start questioning these things. And when you start doing that with the orthodoxies, now the official orthodoxies, the whole thing falls apart. But we've all seen this kind of bewildering imposition of totalitarian controls in our society, we've never had attacks on the United States Constitution that are unprecedented in American history. Remember during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln tried to abandon habeas corpus, just one provision of the United States Constitution. The court said you can't do that. There is no emergency exemption in the United States Constitution. And there's certainly no pandemic exemption. And it's not that our framers did not know about pandemics. It was a pandemic during the Revolutionary War that brought the army of smallpox, brought the armies of New England to a standstill for 3 months. And they all knew about it. And there was another pandemic during the American Revolution of malaria. And Washington, ironically, used the bark of the chinchilla tree, which is the modern analog of the hydroxychloroquine, to end that pandemic. And so they knew about what pandemics were, but they didn't put in the United States Constitution that all of these rights will be suspended as soon as we have a pandemic. And here, James Madison said, The reason we put the First Amendment, the right to free speech in the First Amendment, is because all of the other civil rights and human rights and constitutional rights are based upon it. If a government can hide what it's doing by censoring its opponents and silencing dissidents, it has license to do anything that it wants. So they got rid, they conspired with the social media and the media. We now have the emails that show Fauci corresponding with Zuckerberg, telling him what to shut down and what not to shut down. And they shut down the critics, and once they did that, once they imposed censorship, and they closed the debate off on the public square, they were able to go after all the other amendments, so they went after religious freedoms. They closed the churches in this country, every church in this country, for a year. And they kept the liquor stores open as essential businesses. There's no protection of liquor stores in the United States Constitution. There is protection of churches. They abolished religious exemptions. They got rid of jury trials. One of the first things that they did, the Seventh Amendment, right, the jury trials, Seventh Amendment says, under no conditions will Americans be denied their right to a trial by their peers in matters exceeding $25 in value. And yet, if anybody who claims, any corporation that claims to be implementing a countermeasure is now immune from lawsuits. No matter if it's a vaccine maker, a remdesivir maker, no matter how negligent that company is, no matter how reckless their conduct, no matter how grievous your injury or death, you cannot sue them. And that, again, is novel in American history. All these companies now, and I saw it yesterday in the Theranos lawsuit, that the judge has banned unvaccinated jurors. That ultimately, we all know, is now a political implication, because you're getting rid of all the black jurors. The highest 70% of blacks are unvaccinated. And you're getting rid of any juror who knows how to do critical thinking. Right? They got rid of the rights of association, rights of assembly, by telling us we have to social distance from each other, we can't gather in crowds. Imagine this. They got rid of property rights. They closed every business, 1 million businesses in this country, without due process and without just compensation, in direct violation of the Constitution. They got rid of due process of notice and comment rulemaking. We know how you pass rules in this country in a democracy. Congress can pass rules. They can vote, they can deliberate as they see fit. But a regulatory agency cannot do that. And an executive cannot do that. Because the courts, and we all were frightened to death, we're creating these unelected officials. We have to have some democratic control. So, and I've been suing people for 40 years, governments, the EPA, the Interior Department, all the state EPAs are doing kind of regulatory favors for industry without going through the regulated process. Here's what you have to do when you pass a regulation. You have to propose a rule. You have to publish a proposed rule. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get everybody to put on masks. You have to publish an environmental impact statement, a regulatory impact statement, an economic impact statement saying, here's the science that we use to support that rule. Here's the justification for it. Here's the people who will be hurt and the financial costs of those people and other costs. Here are the advantages and the benefits of that rule. They all have to be quantified. And then they have to give the public a chance to comment, notice a comment. The public then writes in and says, wait a minute, I you're going to put out of business and destroy, and there's no reason there's no science that says that masks will, and on these outside settings, are going to help. Why don't you exempt my business? Every business has a right to write in and say, well, we can do this, we can do that, we can mitigate the risk. So let's change the rule to accommodate that so it's as narrowly tailored as possible as the law requires. None of that happened. And you have a public hearing where Tony Fauci brings in all of his science, a same mask work, none, and all of his scientists that he relied on, and he is not going to be able to find one because we will destroy them in depositions and embarrass and humiliate them. And then we get to cross-examine them, and then they cross-examine ours, and then the administrative law judge rewrites the rules according to so that they aren't arbitrary and capricious, and then recommends them. And then if they don't reflect the evidence, we can sue the agency. So there's all these democratic protections. All of that was waived. All of these things were imposed upon us by fiat, with no discussion, no science cited. And also all this track and trace surveillance is violating our right to not have warrantless searches and seizures. You go through the entire Bill of Rights, and with one exception, in the Second Amendment, they have all been obliterated. And the weird thing to me is I grew up in a liberal milieu where everybody I knew was saying the one thing we got to do is protect the Constitution. And have my side, these ones who are advocating censorship and these kind of controls and the erosion and subversion of our traditional Bill of Rights is really, it is surreal. And we all read Kafka when we were growing up. We all read Orwell. We all watched, we all saw, we read all these Robert Heinlein, all of these stories, these parables about the imposition of totalitarianism. None of us, all of us knew what right was from wrong. And it's bizarre to me to see how people have forgotten those things. One of the things, and I'm writing this book now, about to publish this book on Anthony Fauci. And part of my journey in writing that book, it's taken me over a year of really intense research, was it took me kind of on a journey to try to explain how this could have happened in America. And one of the things that I discovered during this process is that what's happening now, this lockstep imposition of totalitarian controls, not just in America, but in every one of the liberal democracies in the world, and all of the other countries in the world. China moved into Hong Kong and banned the last democratic newspaper, and everywhere in the world we see liberal democracy and constitutional rights disappear. And it all happened at once, as if it was planned. And I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist, and it's tough to imagine how anybody could have planned this. But then I stumbled on these simulations, and many of you saw the simulation that took place in 201, Event 201. In October of 2019. So we now know that the virus began circulating around September 14th. And so this took place after the virus was already circulating in Wuhan. And the people who took part in that simulation were the deputy director of the CIA, April Haines, who's now the number one person in control of the National Security Agency under Biden. Bill Gates, of course, who financed it. people from the social media groups, people from the biggest pharmaceutical companies, Johnson & Johnson, people from global PR, corporate PR agencies, and health officials from all over the world, including Chinese CDC. And what were they simulating? They were simulating a pandemic. They weren't simulating a medical response to that pandemic. They were simulating a militarized response. How do you use that pandemic to, particularly in that Event 201, to impose censorship globally? And that's what they were modeling. If you go look, particularly at episode 4, it's all about, and oddly, their preoccupation was, how do we stop people from talking about the fact that this virus may have been lab generated and released? So they're talking about that in October of 2019, and I'm not making this up. You can go to the simulation and see this. How do we shut these people up? George Gao, the head of the Chinese CDC, is saying we need to stop people from talking about that issue. But as I looked at that issue, I found that there was another one called SPARS, where they did the same thing. They're not talking about how do you quarantine the sick and care for them. Instead, how do you lock down the healthy, something never been done in history? How do you force people to wear masks? How do you force people to comply with social isolation? How do you bring in the military? How do you silence all this? And we're talking about how do you get people to take vitamin D, and how do you build their immune systems and tell them to lose weight, to exercise. 80% of the people who died were overweight, and it was probably a lot more than that because they were counting people who died from lightning strikes and car crashes. And how do you get how do you develop therapeutic drugs, off-the-shelf therapeutic drug? Most obvious thing to do, to create a communication system among the world's 11 million doctors, people who are frontline treating the disease, so that every successful treatment protocol is called in, other people given the opportunity to repeat it, and then ways to assess which ones are working, which ones aren't, and to do really rapid placebo-controlled trials in hospitals all over the world, and to create field clinics where you're treating people who are not sick but are infected, so they never have to go to the hospital, and develop protocols so they never have to leave their homes. So you want to avoid hospitalizations. One, because that's the reason they gave for shutting down society. Two, if you can treat somebody before they leave their home, every time somebody leaves their home who's sick and going to the hospital really sick, that is a super spreader event. That person is spreading the disease to Uber drivers, to doctors, to nurses, to family members, to people on the street. You want to treat them at home. Give them the things that we know kill viral replication. Zinc and anything that enhances zinc, like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and 100 other remedies that we now know dramatically reduce the spread of this disease. And what was our protocol? Our protocol was to do none of that. No treatment until you go to the hospital. Then your treatment are two things that are bound to kill you: ventilators and remdesivir. And Tony Fauci knew that remdesivir would kill you. Yes. He knew that because in 2019, he tried to use it for Ebola. 2019, he tried to use it for Ebola, and within 5 days of treatment, it gave lethal side effect to 54% of the people, and the Safety Monitoring Board ordered him to terminate the use of that drug. And he, through a phony, contrived, absolutely fraudulent study that he manipulated and orchestrated of that drug, made standard of care. It is homicide. And if you look, how does it kill people? 2 ways, 3 ways. Kidney failure, heart failure, and all organ collapse. And what happened to the people who died in the pandemic? What were they dying of? Kidney failure. All the doctors said, you heard it again and again, we've never seen a virus that attacks the kidneys. Because it wasn't the virus, it was the remdesivir. And he denied them deliberately, purposely, access to the things that we know work because 248 studies show they do, which is ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and all the other, even monoclonal steroid antibodies, which they know work. They denied all the people who were in the nursing home where they could have given it to them. So, something about this smell, it was suspicious and weird from the beginning, but what I found during the course of my research is that those simulations were not just confined to event 201 into SARS. I found now over a dozen of them where they did them at least once every 2 years from beginning in 2000. Most of them were top secret, but they involved hundreds of thousands of people. They were doing these simulations with all the police forces, many of the big city police forces in our country, with frontline doctors and nurses, with medical officials, with the big corporate officials from the energy industry, from the medical cartels, from the pharmaceutical industry. And they were involving not just the United States, Canada, Mexico, and all the nations of Europe were all participating secretly and drilling this again and again and again.
Affecting their lie.
If you look at the techniques that they were using, I've spent a lot, here's some things they had in common. Virtually every one of those simulations involved representatives from the CIA, and they were written, the scripts for them were written by people associated with the intelligence agencies. Almost all of them had a well-known American or European leader. Heads of Denmark, Sweden, Sam Nunn, Madeleine Albright, Gary Hart would be at the head of them. And that gave them kind of an imprimatur of gravitas and legitimacy. So all of these frontline workers who were being asked to do weird things, not cure patients, but censor people, they all now have in their head, this is what you do with the pandemic. This is a legitimate way to respond to the pandemic. This is the only way to respond. It's not to make people better. It's not to treat their illnesses. It's not to keep them alive. It's to clamp down totalitarian control. I wrote a book about my family's 60-year battle with the CIA called American Values. And in researching that, I went out and purchased, at great cost, some of them cost me thousands of dollars, the CIA manuals for manipulating large populations. And they wrote a series of manuals for the techniques that are useful when the intelligence agencies want to go into other foreign policy pangerms, want to go into an indigenous society, to destroy local businesses, to isolate, to destroy institutional structures, to destroy social structures and social relationships, to obliterate the economy, to create chaos, that will then create enough people in that country who will allow a foreign entity to come in and clamp down centralized control. And almost all of the techniques that are outlined in those manuals are the same techniques that they were practicing in these simulations year after year after year with hundreds of thousands of people. And for example, in the CIA manual, the CIA conducted these well-known programs that were called various names, Operation Artichoke, MK Ultra, etc., during the late 50s, 60s, and 70s. And to develop ways of manipulating human beings on an individual basis and on a mass basis. And the most potent technique, incidentally, that they learned again and again and again, more potent than physical torture, was isolation. If you can isolate people, and they did this with sensory deprivation tanks, also just locking people in solitary confinement, you can get them to do almost anything you want after a certain period of time. It will drive them mad, because we're social animals, we're social beings. And when you tear those social fabric, it makes people desperate, fearful, and obedient to do anything. Another technique is called Stockholm Syndrome, which is a way of putting individuals or large parts of humanity on lockdown for long periods of time. And it induces a kind of mass psychosis that makes them grateful to their captors, makes them empathize with their captors, renders them obedient, believing that obedience is the only path to salvation, absolute obedience. And it obliterates, again, critical thinking. But during this period, the CIA was funding these kind of studies at many 149 universities, including McGill University in Canada, universities at Berkeley, Harvard, Columbia, many others all around our country, and even some universities in Central America, Guatemala, etc. And they were using prison populations, they were using military people, they were using subjects from mental institutions, people who were expendable, whose disappearance would not be noticed. And one of the, we don't know exactly which of these projects were funded by the CIA, because that was never released in the family jewels disclosures in the 1970s when the Senate did these investigations. All the material was subsequently destroyed, or most of it. But there were these mind control experiments at all the colleges, and one of the ones that almost certainly was funded by the CIA, scholars believe, is an experiment called the Milgram experiment. Many of you have heard of it. The Milgram experiment, and you can look this up, as a young psychologist or social scientist called Stanley Milgram, and he recruited subjects from every walk of life, blacks, whites, cross-section American, factory workers, construction workers, university professors, students, etc., housewives, and he would put the subject in a room and sit them at a table where they would twist a dial, and the dial would supposedly administer electric shocks to a person sitting in the next room who they could not see. They could hear the screams and the pleading and the crying, the agony that they were causing and the begging. And they had a guy who was dressed as a doctor in a white lab coat who was telling them, turn it up higher at different intervals. And many of the people who were turning it up were crying because they didn't want to do it, because it clashed with their essential values. It clashed with their conscience. They had to overwrite their conscience. And the doctor would have ordered them to 67%. You can look this up, even Wikipedia, which is just a pharma propaganda site, will tell you this. At 67% of the people, the Americans, who liberal, conservative, etc., who were told to do that, turned that dial up to 450 volts, it said on the dial, potentially fatal. So they were willing to kill somebody if a doctor told them to do it. And that's a really important lesson for today. Because what do they have? They don't have science. They don't have any success Fauci gave us one of the worst record arguably in the world of preserving life. We have 5% of the population of the world and 25% of the deaths in the richest country in the world. How's that possible? We have 1 in 1,600 per million die in our country. There's African countries where they take hydroxychloroquine once a week where they had 1 in a million die. More than 1,000 times greater than these poor countries that at first they were telling us they're going to bear the brunt. They're the people who are going to need the most help, and they don't want our help because they're doing it right. And so we have a doctor with the worst track record, a doctor who came in 1984 or 68 when 6% of the American public had chronic disease, which he's supposed to prevent, allergic immune diseases, autoimmune disease, which he's supposed to prevent. And today, under his watch, 54% of our children have those diseases. He has failed upward his entire career. So he's telling us these fiats, here's what you've got to do. He has a schoolboy's allergy to citation. He never tells us, here's the science that says this. He just says, this is what the science says. And one day the science says, masks don't work, and 2 months later it says, strap on 2 of them. There's no science cited. Lockdowns work, no science. And then all of my colleagues in the Democratic Party are saying, well, we got to trust the experts. But that, trusting the experts, is a function of religion, not science. Science is about skepticism. It's about questioning. It's about cynicism. It's about not believing in anything you told me. It's about show me the evidence. I was on the trial team that tried the Monsanto case. And in the Monsanto case, Monsanto came in with the greatest experts in America, people from Harvard School of Public Health, etc. My wife, who's not an attorney, came and sat in on the trial one day when Monsanto had its experts. At the end of the day, she said, why are you even doing this? This poor company, why are you abusing them? To me. And I said to her, wait till tomorrow when we cross-examine them. At the end of that day, she said, what a bunch of liars. So every case, every law, I've been involved in 500 lawsuits, and every one of them involves, the defendants, the corporations come in with their experts, and we come in with ours. And in this case, we had Harvard experts too. And in the end, the jury believed our experts, and they gave us $2.2 billion. And so this idea that you trust the experts is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. Every major medical theory, whether it's heliocentrism or evolution, it started out as a minority position that was ridiculed and gaslighted and laughed at and marginalized, and then it was accepted as fact. And so, we need to respect each other's opinions. We need to respect critical thinking, and we need to be nurturing that, not silencing it. And yet we have, these political, listen, when you go to your doctor and he tells you, you got a big problem, and I need to do surgery on you, what do? You say, I want a second opinion. And we should be doing the same thing with Tony Fauci. By the way, there are many medical experts out there who are saying the opposite. There's Peter Corey, and Peter McCulloch, and Peter Bregman, and Dr. Harvey Risch from Yale, and I can go on, Ryan Cole, all of these people who actually treat COVID patients and save their lives and are achieving results with those patients that Tony Fauci never dreamed of. That we could have, and they're all saying 80% of Americans who died did not need to die. if you had done these common sense proven protocols. And that's what they're saying. And what is the response? It's not debate. It's not, let me see your evidence. It's, these people are dangerous, they need to be silenced. And that's not America. And you know, what all of us need to understand is that our country is under attack right now. We have lost. America is, what is our country? Is it just a place where, you can come and accumulate a big pile for yourself and whoever dies with most stuff wins? Or is it, is it the landscapes, is it the Purple Mountains majesty? Is it the population, the diversity, etc.? It's all those things. More than anything else, it's our Constitution. It's the statement of shared values that holds us all together as a people. And we're saying to the rest of the world, we believe something in our country more strongly than anybody else believes, which is that we have to love our liberties more than we fear a disease.
Yeah.
What I tell my children, who sometimes question me, I've said to them, because they hear CNN all the time and they read the New York Times, and they say, well, this is going to kill people, and I say to them, there's a lot worse things that die, and that may seem cold, but there was a generation of Americans in 1776 who said, you know what? It's worth dying to give my children and their children a bundle of rights that will guarantee them liberty forever. And so they laid down their property, their livelihoods, their lives to provide us with that Constitution, which we have given away for free to a blind doctor in 1 year after 200 years of preserving it. And, we need to understand that these are things that we need to be fighting for right now. And that, I've told people for many, many years, people have come to me, famous actors and athletes, and said, I don't want to challenge the vaccine protocol because it's going to destroy my career in doctors. And I've always said to them, well, there's ways to work around it, to be part of the battle without sacrificing your livelihoods. But the time has come now where we all have to stand up. And we all have to be committing civil disobedience every single day, peacefully. And if that means when you see somebody with a baby walking by, you tell them, don't give a COVID vaccine to that baby, because that baby has no chance of dying of COVID. And they have a big chance of getting injured from that vaccine. And we provide cards that talk about the facts, a CHD, and you can get those, you can hang them out, you can put them in restrooms, you can put them on bulletin boards. You can tell your doctor to his face, show me the evidence. You can be confrontational with people. You can be gentle, you can say what you mean without saying it mean. But you need to start talking back, and you need to start talking up. And the more people that do that, you know what? There's a lot of converts coming over to our side. There's no converts going over to their side. And the way that they have robbed people of critical thinking is by repeating the same message over and over and over again. And we know that there's peer-reviewed evidence that shows that works, advertising works. That's why it's a $100 billion industry. If you repeat a message, no matter how ridiculous it is, again and again, people begin to believe it. The way that you shatter that paradigm out of orthodoxy is by repeating the opposite message, the truth, and letting somebody hear that when they're out on their morning walk. They're walking their baby in a stroller through the grocery store. when they, when they're in the doctor's office, listening to the doctor fire you while you talk back to him, and, making trouble everywhere you go. And standing up, and because people are going to hear you, and they may not convert at that point, they hear that 2 or 3 times, and they're going to say, maybe I ought to look into this. And you know what happens when you start looking into this. It's down the rabbit hole, and you're like, holy crap, I can't believe what they did to us. So, anyway, I want to, again, thank all of you. We are fighting now this is the American Revolution all over again. It started out with a small group of people, and it wasn't just the revolution where people gave their lives for this country. In the Civil War, 669,000 people died to preserve our nation, and they gave up their lives with great bravery, and we need to now be willing to give up something, to make sacrifices, and to win this battle against these elites and these globalists who are trying to take away everything that is meaningful to us, our freedom, our pride in our country. And, I can say to you, I'm very proud to be in this room with all of you. What the Milgram experiment showed, at 67% of the people in this country, your neighbors, good Americans, will allow their conscience to be overridden, will trample their own values if they're told to do so by a voice of authority, and particularly by a doctor and a medical code. And the people, that 67%, that means 33% didn't do that. And the 33% that didn't are the people sitting in this room. You need to be proud of the fact that you were not in that group that electrocuted somebody. My father told me when I was a little kid, he read the diary of Anne Frank to me and my siblings, and he said people kept saying, at that point in history, a lot of people were talking about the Nazis and how the German people, this could happen to them. My father said, this is not anything to do with Germans. We all have this disease. They can do this to any of us. And he said, you kids need to ask yourself, if this ever happened in the United States, would you be the people who hit Anne Frank, or would you be the people who turned her in? And you guys all answered that question. You're the ones who would have hidden Anne Frank, and you need to be proud of that. You kept your values, your critical thinking when they were under terrible, ferocious assault. And what I will pledge to you is that I am proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with all of you and with my friend Ron Paul and fight this battle, the Second American Revolution. And I can tell you right now, I do not know whether we're going to win or lose, and I can't tell you. The only thing I can control is a little piece of real estate inside my own shoes. And I can tell you that whatever happens, that I will go down fighting, and that I will die with my boots on. Well, the last speaker needs no introduction, so I won't introduce him. But here's Dr. Ron Paul.
you did a very good job on that. I said, no, it's always the audience that makes the difference. So we have a wonderful group of people here with us today. I think we should recognize one individual that put probably a few hours into making sure this would work. Because, you know, the government actually canceled that other hotel. Can you believe that? They owned the property. They said, get out. I told Daniel, don't sweat it. We might get a room that's even bigger. And it turned out. But Daniel had to put up with a lot of planning. And it worked out very, very well. And he even admitted to me the day before yesterday, he said, I'm stressed. So let's give Dan. It'd be real hard to go down the list of speakers because we had so many. I can't think of any. It wasn't just great, you know. It was a wonderful, wonderful program. And it's just too bad that we can't do it more often. And we've had this spell. We feel like we haven't been on the road doing our job. And yet it's worked out real well. The one thing that I noticed is that it's been helpful to communicate with true believers with the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And would you raise your hand if you look at the Liberty Report? There's a few here. And you know, for some reason, I at times become suspicious. There are others who get more suspicious and paranoid than I do. But sometimes I think the numbers that are reported, you know, on YouTube seem to be smaller than what we actually sense and feel. But nevertheless, we still have it as a vehicle. It's great that we're able to do it, and we try to have backups in case the lines don't work so well. But right now, we'll use what's available to us. And the important thing is whether or not we can communicate and whether or not you're an enthusiastic supporter for the cause of liberty. And this is a great reassurance that there are a bunch of people who are still in growing numbers to be enthusiastic about freedom, so we are going to continue. You know, we have a lot of problems, and the speakers have spoken a lot about the problems. And I will talk about, you know, difficulties, both financial. I wrote a little pamphlet not too long ago. It had to do with bankruptcy, and it was my conclusion when there's a financial bankruptcy and there's a moral bankruptcy in this country. And I think when we look at the emphasis on this program domestically, the moral bankruptcy really comes glaring out. But the financial bankruptcy, as you say, well, this is sort of on civil liberties and personal liberties and how the government's abusing us. But you really can't separate that from an important issue that I've talked about, because as far as I'm concerned, honest money is a civil liberty that we ought to be protecting. You know, we have the First Amendment, especially talking about freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and these are all important. But we also have this emphasis on petitioning the government, and that legalizes actually lobbyists. I mean, you don't have to say that petitioning the government is always a bad lobbyist. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of petitioners and a lot of lobbyists that aren't necessarily on our side of this issue. Matter of fact, it's gone to the dogs is what it is. You know, the people that come in there, when you just think of the organization, take the military-industrial complex, and now we have the pharmaceutical medical complex. And this petitioning of the government, I would expect that our founders would be just aghast And what that turned into, yes, we should have a right to go to the government. But you know, did you ever think about it? If the government, instead of being this big, was this big, there wouldn't be so much effort trying to get something out of the government because the role of government would be so small. But it is something though that goes on, and it represents the fact that the government keeps growing because the people and many others have accepted principles that government is supposed to be big, it's supposed to provide services, it's supposed to be a safety net for everybody, and it's always couched in terms of humanitarianism. And of course, if they talk about taking care of people when they get in trouble financially or whatever, the government marches in, just like 18 months ago with the opening up of this COVID thing. You know, it went wild. And this happened after 9/11, as far as I'm concerned, too, is the government moves in, spends billions of dollars, takes away our liberties, and ignores the problem. And I think that's happened again. I mean, they came in here with these trillions of dollars, and it's pretty easy to do it now because you don't even have to go to Congress. Today we heard about how the Congress works, and the Congress is supposed to appropriate money and do these things, but they don't have to do that. I mean, I think the Federal Reserve can create money much faster, or because the others can't create money, but they produce more money and pump it in, but guess what? It causes the division of the society, and that's why we have these social conflicts. So whether it's 9/11 or whether it's a COVID crisis, what we end up with is government is spending more money, but the division within us always gets worse. And when the government gets involved, there's less productive wealth, and the productive wealth doesn't diminish, except there is a lot of wealth transfer. So you have more billions and more millionaires and trillionaires. You have more of that, and you have a lot more people living in tents on the streets. And yet there's still a lot of wealth out there. The whole thing about this wealth, we wonder why should this happen and have so much trouble with not understanding the business cycle and why this happens. And I think the one problem came to us, after World War II. We were on the victor side. We had less property damage. We had less people killed. We ended up with all the gold. We ended up with a military the strongest in the history. And the wealth was huge. And so some people can't understand, well, if we've been doing this, and ever since the Depression, we've been practicing the intervention with economics and the people, the redistribution of wealth, Keynesianism, and yet it seems to work pretty good. It's getting worse all the time, but I think what was happening right after the war, I think we were very, very wealthy, and we still are pretty darn wealthy as a country. But we destroyed, the system the way it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to work by having, guess who writes the drug bills law, the pharmaceutical industry? Guess who writes the bills law in Washington? It's the banking industry. They come in and write these things. So it's totally out of control, but we've gotten away with it for a long time. But I think what I heard here by various speakers, and I think it's probably understood by many of you, is that we're on the verge of some very bad and tough times. And in spite of what happened the last 10, 20, or 30 years, because I think we have destroyed the system itself. We've destroyed the value of money. We've destroyed the value of the economic system. But worst of all, we destroyed the trust. The trust in government facilities, but in everything. And that's why there's so much division, that trust is lost. And I don't think this is an accident. I think this is done by individuals that sort of are winning, even when things look so stupid and so dumb out there. Why would they do this? And heaven, what's the purpose of that? But the only way I've been able to not get too upset with that is I look for the person and the people who might benefit from the stupidity all. And there's always somebody that's going to benefit from it, and they are doing it. And those people are the ones that we have to identify. I happen to think the ringleaders are found in this organization, pseudo-organization, the cultural Marxists. Those are the ones we better understand and deal with. They have been very well, and I think we are seeing and witnessing all these things that are going on. And I think the tool that the cultural Marxists uses is this wokeism. And I think wokeism is a significant event. It's a bringing together Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And those are the tools that they use. And you might say, well, why did they do it? It's all backfiring, isn't it? But you have to remember the understanding of Marxism is, from the very beginning, it's just not a new idea for the Marxists. They said if you want to have true Marxism, what you have to do is cleanse it of this idea that people have personal responsibilities and they have a higher law that they're supposed to follow. They might have religious beliefs. And they tried it, it didn't work very well, so they're more energized than ever now to make sure that they eliminate anything like that, because that is the enemy, and of course that's been going on for a long time. I keep thinking that in many ways historically there's been a lot of respect for the things that we believe in, but there's been a lot of ups and downs. I think it's good and evil that's been going, that little debate's been going on for a long time, and I think that's really what it boils down to is people trying to figure out, philosophically, they don't think about the philosophy about it, but I think it's this whole idea of whether or not there's a higher law that is very important for all of us, and that has been around a long time, and there is another law too. And I've come to the conclusion the best word I can use for this contest going on is those of us who would believe in a higher law and the principles we espouse. At the same time, the people who are the enemy are the nihilists. They do not believe, and it's loud and clear, they claim it, that there is no economic or no basis for the understanding of what truth is. So they have philosophically said there is no such thing as truth. And Nietzsche and others have for years talked about it. They don't have it. They're coming from a completely different philosophic position. That's why don't waste a whole lot of time on people acting out there and they're doing really stupid things because they're not on the same level, and I don't think that's going to work. The way I bring this down to a smaller example is it really bothers me, and I'm sure it bothers every single person in this room. You'll read a story that there's a hoodlum out in the street, and a real hoodlum, he's going up and down, and he's the tough guy, and he goes in and he wants to rob a store, and somebody, and there's been stories similar to it, and the clerk at the store, is hiding behind a counter or was wounded or something, and the thug that comes in, he comes in, and as he's leaving, he has his stuff. He can just leave, but he just goes over and fills that person with bullets. Now that is real insanity, and I think internationally and politically, people think that way, and I think the people that organize what's going on in the world today have the same type of reception. They're the ones who can be described as a psychopath and sociopaths. They don't have a conscience. They don't feel guilt. And that means, and they accept accept, the one thing they do accept is that use of force is irrelevant, you know, because there are no consequences. And there's always going to be problems because avoiding all violence, I think we lost that battle in Adam and Eve, you know. And it's been going on, and good and evil's been going on. But I don't think we use the term nihilist enough. But I really believe that's our big problem in understanding. I use that in my mind to understand the enemy on what they're thinking about and how they think. And in many ways, because I use the terms all the time, and I hear it just in conversation. Why are they doing that? It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't, even though you say, well, yeah, but look, they're making everything worse. It might even hurt themselves. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Their goal is to wipe everything out that we believe is decent. And now what we're recognizing is we're identifying the country and the people are identifying, we're recognizing what it is, and we can see the consequence of this. But I think one thing when we talk about rights and protection that we have ignored, and it isn't explicitly in the Constitution, but it's in the Constitution. You know, the First Amendment lists them in a way. But the one right that I think we ignore is sometimes I go through the amendments or what we're protecting. Yeah, if you have the First Amendment, we can do anything because we can still reach the people. No, we need the Second Amendment because with our guns we can defend ourselves and on and on. But I think one thing that we ignore is the understanding of property. And I don't think that's something new. I think this whole issue of the importance of property goes all the way back to Hammurabi, 17th century BC. He I think the laws were like 282, and he's given the credit for putting down law for the first time, written out law, and give the people a little bit of an understanding between the authorities and the people. And and the one thing fascinating that I found about the Hammurabi Code is that 1/2 of those many laws that they passed had to do with contracts. And I thought, well, you know, I didn't go through them all, but if you're having a contract, that means there were agreements. That meant there was probably an understanding, you know, of contracts between individuals and also property. And so I think it started way back, and that's a long time. And of course, the Hammurabi Code and gave some pretty good advice on killing and stealing and these other things. It goes off on a tangent at times when you talk about the types of punishment that they used back there, but they recognized property. But I think, you know, then it took 300 years for Moses to bring us the 10th Commandments. And the 10 Commandments actually is improved because it introduced the notion of a higher law too as well. Now when Moses brought that to us, you know, it was no lying, cheating, no stealing, no killing, no murdering, you know, and this was 300 years afterward. So it's been around a long time, this whole thing, you know, about property. But I think incrementally we've improved our understanding of the essence of property. I think John Locke was very instrumental for giving information and for our the founding fathers for writing the Constitution, because he was a believer in natural law, a higher law. He believed in property rights, and they were essential if you want to believe in liberty. So you put those together, and it's not quite as complicated. And you know, there were some of the founders that argued against passing the Bill of Rights. Not that what they were trying to do was bad, as much as they didn't think it would be very practical, because how can you put down every single right? I like to make things more simple than that and think a right is a right, and you know what to do. And what I do is I start off with a right to life, all life. And you deal with that, and then you say, well, we all have our lives and we think we should protect it. Well, it's not doing too badly. Of course, it's getting more difficult. The government gets more aggressive all the time and gives us a lot of regulations and medical treatments that aren't very beneficial. But the chance of that happening, the medical profession gets, interferes with this so much. But the property rights issue, I think, is very, very important because when you think about the listing on the First Amendment, if you have freedom of the press, well, you need a newspaper building. Okay, you want freedom of religion. Well, you need a church or a synagogue or whatever, and you have it. And if you respect the property, then you really have the right. So this whole idea of a right, but there are some that would accept this, but they wouldn't accept the libertarian addition to that right to life, and that is that you cannot use aggression to have your way in any matter. Whether it's taking a property or regulating, telling people what to do, and yet to me it seems so wonderful on how this would work. It's sort of sad that we as a group, you're all involved, we're all trying to do something more, but when you compare what can be a consequence of a free society with a recognition of individual liberty and personal rights, compared to what we have had in this country for hundreds of years, because we have drifted a long way from the Bill of Rights. I mean, what number in the First Amendment do we protect? Just with COVID, they just badgered and cut them to pieces. So it's something that we as a people must understand what it is in order to protect it. And I can't see how you can do it unless you do have an understanding of a higher law. I don't think that the Constitution's been around for a long time. And I think I could make a case and go and say, from the very beginning, there was a disintegration of the principles of the Constitution, and some of those comments were made today. So it doesn't do it. It all depends on the character of the people, and that's why when I talked about the bankruptcy, the financial bankruptcy, we know to spend too much money, have debt, print money, and all that, but then. The rest of it, the whole thing, depends on the morality of the society and the people. And you say, well, everybody has different views. I think that's wonderful. We have different religions, we have different jobs, we have different emphasis, we raise our kids differently. But as long as the one rule, the one law is followed, that there's to be no aggression, we can live with it. This is why I like to go to some of the progressive groups, the liberal groups, that are willing to be honest, and they haven't, dug into the nihilism stuff, and just say, look, why should we be fighting? I want my freedom, you want your freedom. But your freedom means you don't even have to go to church, or you can go to a synagogue, you can do anything as long as you don't hurt people. What's the big deal, And it's something that I think I keep working on it because I would like to make it as presentable as possible to make people say, that makes sense. That really makes sense. So that's what we should be really looking at, is how to present the case, for liberty. But there's a lot of things that are going on today, though, that are pretty darn scary, because I do think the financial crisis is going to be very, very bad. And you say, well, how can you get any optimism out of there? We heard a lot of pessimism. We had some optimism here today. But I think that, when I look at it in a perspective way of what we're facing, and look at what our country has faced in my lifetime. I was born during the Depression. I remember the tail end of the Depression, and it was a mess. And what was the first thing that Roosevelt did? He stole all our gold. I didn't like that idea either. So no, and it was bad times. The government created the Depression and made it worse, and people suffered and people died. And it was a tragedy. And then it was financed by a Federal Reserve System. It was unconstitutional, and that should be abolished. the Federal Reserve will finance all that and the economic system. But what do? They run up the debt, and then that leads to a greater problem. But we get by mainly because I think we get by of all the stupidity in our economic system is because we have unearned opulence. It's not earned, and there's a lot of opulence, and as time goes on, it goes from a time when great wealth in this country was like this, with a large middle class. But now we have great wealth, not necessarily growing because everybody's livers being taxed. Now we go over and this goes down, middle class goes down, and the very wealthy gets bigger and bigger. So it's opulence there, and that is where real division comes, because the economic distribution just becomes overtowering to the people, and it's real easy to demagogue, and that's why we can actually find these Marxists in the Congress now. There was a time back when I was leaving Congress, and I was talking to somebody, and I said, the one thing is, I was always looking for a little bit of optimism. I said, you know what, while I've been here, I've never heard other members say, I'm a socialist. And, but I would have people come up and say, even when they're not, they'll come up and say, Ron, I'm a libertarian on this issue. That sort of thing. Libertarianism wasn't an evil word, but at that time there was enough resistance towards socialism that people didn't say, I'm a socialist now. Now you get canceled if you don't say I'm a socialist now. So it has changed, but that still doesn't destroy my desire and hope and the possibility that we can survive all this. Because, we got through the Depression, we got through World War II, we got through Korea, we got through, Vietnam, we got through, 9/11, barely, and each time it seems to get worse. But things have been very bad, and things do come back. But that's pretty much all of history. But I really am a firm believer that we have to get more people who have the basic understanding about what real liberty is all about, and that they're able to figure out some way. I get so many questions from young people that come out and say, they might be at a college campus or something. And they'll come up and say, Dr. Pope, what should I do? What should I do? I agree with you. And my answer to that, do whatever you want. Just do something. I am so pleased, and almost at every meeting like this, and I had some here, and there have been several, somebody will come and tell me. The one that sort of excites me the most was the 13-year-old that said, I heard you back when I was in grade school, and you got me interested, and I've been following you all along. He says, and I had to sort of do some persuading with my dad for a while. But he says now he's a dedicated libertarian. There was one time during the presidential campaigns that a couple came in with a young teenager. I think he was 14 years old. And he came in and he was so excited, because he had been following the campaign and he knew what was going on. I actually complimented him there. I said, he told me what he knew a little bit about the Federal Reserve. I said, you know what? You know more about the Federal Reserve than almost every member of Congress. So that's encouraging, but I still have people come up, and they're all around the country. And that's the neat thing about people getting excited about liberty. It's neat that it's out there, and it's neat that you can't count it and dismiss it. There is a remnant. There is a remnant philosophically, in a religious sense, and in a political sense. There's always somebody there that's going to cling to it. And there were quite a few in the 30s and the 40s and early 50s that really came together and did the publications, the early libertarians. There were even a few in the Congress, they didn't call themselves libertarian, but there were people there writing and studying and refining the principles of liberty. The one person that I quote a lot and give credit to because he influenced me personally was Leonard Reed at the Foundation for Economic Education. And he talked about how you present the case for liberty and what liberty is, and it was, you know, the nonviolence of it all. So it was there. But I love it when young people come out and they're very, very successful. If you look at some of these cable now talk shows, sometimes I have to go ask Daniel. I said, "No, this person here, what does he do?" But I want to check on it. And a lot of them were people that you know got started in our campaign. And they're very successful, and I love it. You know, there's some have been successful in the financial sense too, but they're getting the message out there, and it was because they did something. And but I think we all have this responsibility. You know, we have a responsibility to do something, and you know, it's something that if we're not inspired to do something, of course, nothing will happen. But I think that there's a lot of that activity going on. It really inspires me. To tell you the truth, I probably get more from a meeting like this than you get, because I really enjoy meeting people that would put the time and the energy and invest and talk and try to protect your kids and all of this. So I lean toward a demand that I be more optimistic, and I can try to justify it. But I also, you know, think it's really, really bad. There was one time I was talking to a college, probably a college student during the campaign, and the issue came up about the Constitution in one of the debates. And of course, you know, my position and somebody else said something similar to what I was saying. And so afterwards, he came up, he was very excited. He was telling me, well, I really like what you're doing because you're talking about the Constitution, you know, this sort of thing. And so I said, yeah, but, you know, so-and-so, I think, I think he might have been that mayor of a big city. I said, the others were saying that too. They were promoting the Constitution. I said, well, why are you telling me that? They said, we don't believe them. And you know, there is something to that. People, and that's what's happened now. We've destroyed the trust. You know, in Washington, I keep thinking that, you know, with my experience, you know, I can sort of neutralize and not get too upset with people. And I did a lot of that, and I tried to work with people who disagreed with me, and got a convert here and there. But it's difficult to do it. But there's a lot of people who are out there and they're looking for the message. They have to think of things, and there are a lot of things now. If you want to get more information about you know, the economics, especially, and all the things on libertarian, I still think the Mises Institute is one of the greatest, and there's a lot like that. Because I'm convinced, obviously, that ideas have consequences, and that if an idea whose time has come, it can't be stopped. And I think our ideas are there, so we have to have our ideas succeed. You have to understand the enemy as well and be warned about it, so that you answer their question. And so I think that we have achieved a whole lot in that regard, and I think it's going to be difficult. That's the whole thing. It's a smooth sailing. No, it never was and never will be. But the one point I'd like to reemphasize again is that if you really concentrate and understand about property, that you are rewarded for incentives, that you can solve a lot of the problems. And the one story, I'm sure most of you have heard this story, which was a real enlightenment. I mentioned a couple of things in history where they were recognizing early on about the benefits of liberty. And this was the Bradford colony, Plymouth colony, when it was settled. And when it was settled, they had the Mayflower Compact, which was, turned out it was more of a social compact, but they landed, and Bradford was the governor, and he set this up. Well, everybody will go in this field, this field, this field. We'll put all the food into one bin, and when you need it, we'll pass it out to you. Would you be surprised if I told you it didn't work? the people didn't want to work for somebody else, and some people needed more than others. It was a total rejection of private property. It wasn't like somebody at that time in history didn't know about private property. In Europe, they knew about it. But Bradford finally, after I guess 2 years of starvation, people were dying, that he had land plots, divvied it up. Each family had a plot of land. And can you believe it? It thrived after that. The kids went to work, the parents went to work, and before the production went up, they started trading stuff internally, and then they actually was able to, they probably had tobacco and things, and probably started selling. So the whole colony thrived after that, and it was based on private property incentive. But if you have private property, and you're doing things to take care of yourself, aren't you a sinner? You're too selfish. Well, I don't think I ever read that in the Bible, that if you take care of yourself, you're selfish. But matter of fact, I think in this day and age, you are really being generous, because if you did that, if you were willing to work and take care of yourself, and never ask for or depend on the government stealing something from somebody else to give to you, you'd be in a much moral situation, more productive, and the whole world would be better off. The whole issue of war, I think, comes up all the time, because war is a time when you can do more to take away people's liberty. Whether it was the 9/11 episode, or whether it was the war in the Middle East. Look, it took them 20 years to finally say, let's throw in the towel. And then people got angry. You're leaving too soon. Those are the conservatives. I've argued for a long time, and it was, I think, recognized at this meeting. I always knew that in looking at this and talking to my friends and looking at the parties, it wasn't so much the Republicans and the Democrats. The only two things you had to worry about were the conservatives and the liberals. And everybody else was, they were all statists. They were not people who want to reduce it, the pretense of it all. But I think that's academic, because the only thing that really counts is what people believe in and their moral fiber. If you have people, yes, nobody will be perfect. There will be mistakes, and there will be violence when there shouldn't be. But I'll tell you what, we had a small test of it, a small dose of it in our early history, and we thrived and we lived on it. In a way, it's an interesting backfire on us on that, an unintended consequence. With a relative amount of liberty, it can hide a lot of mistakes by government. For instance, if the government's printing a lot of money, we know eventually it'll push up prices. But if you have a fair amount of freedom, and you put a lot of money in, and productivity does this, it hides the distortions, and nobody knows. That's sort of what happened in the 30s. There was inflation, but it was distorted because the CPI wasn't going up. So it's something that we in understanding this, we realize that so much is corrected, and we should be able to look at the positive things. But I tell you, I can't now ignore the subject of nihilism and the nihilistic attitudes of that kid going there, bang, 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 and have no remorse, no feeling. And just think of what it's like when a George Soros and a Bill Gates goes about what they want for this world. Believe me, they don't lose any sleep over that. What we'd like to do is spread our message so they might start losing some sleep.
for coming out under difficult circumstances. We're grateful to you for being here. We know that everyone wants to say hi to Dr. Paul. He does have to catch a plane, so please try to respect his time. He needs to get out, but I'm sure he wants to say hi. And thank you again, everyone. Gold and silver, 4 o'clock in the Red Fox room. The rest of you, hopefully we'll see you next year. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again, and hopefully we'll be in better circumstances. Take care, everyone. God bless.